Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empowering the Next Generation podcast with me, Coach Helen. I am so grateful that you're still watching what we are doing here. We are here to help you to ignite education, develop leaders, and create meaningful connections. We are bringing for you experts who have wisdom in their fields. And it's amazing because at the end of the day, we want you to start growing into your expertise as well. So if you feel that you want to turn your years of experience in the classroom and really make a bigger impact and create more revenue, I would encourage you to join my membership community. The link will be in the comment section. And I hope that you enjoy this episode. We have an amazing guest speaker with us today. I'm going to introduce you Jessica Lane. She is an educator, she's a former school leader, she's an author, she's a co-founder of Symplifyed. Her works really help school move beyond overwhelming data and rigid systems to make better decisions using tiny data, human connection, and practical support. So she's also the author of Data Informed Purpose Driven, and I love that name. So we will talk about data to trust today, how we can really help people to really grow into their leadership and transform their school with data and trust. So thank you for joining us, Jessica. Can you come on to the podcast? Awesome. Woo, she's here. Woo-hoo.
Here, hi. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for taking the time. I know we're quite busy and you're still showing up for yourself, still sharing your message. So I know that you have said that schools don't really actually they don't have a data problem. They have a trust problem wearing a data costume. So can you just really explain what does it mean really and why it is important in such an important part of education today? Because I believe it is a powerful statement.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I could go on. This is basically the premise of my book, Data Informed People Driven, which when this is aired, it should have just come out on Amazon. So definitely check that out. But Um, yeah, so a little bit about my background because I feel like it definitely helps lead to this aha moment that I had. I started off in the classroom. I was a high school math teacher. I love data, of course, because high school math teacher, it makes sense. And then I went to be an instructional coach and part of like a leadership team, and then and I was still teaching, and then I went to just instructional coaching, and then I went to data coaching and then I went from data coaching to district data coordinator. Lots of
Wow.
D's. Sorry, I'm getting all my D's mixed up. But in the midst of doing that, I actually started creating all of these really cool data systems. I say cool. I thought they were super cool. Basically spreadsheets. I worked a lot in Google Suite, so a lot of like Looker Studio slash Data Studio, depending on what time of the past 10 years you've seen it. I use that to create a lot of dashboards, and people were like, oh my goodness, you should start doing this for other schools as well. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I love doing this. I'm going to do it. So I started my own business. And back then it was Just Colleen, 8817 Just Colleen. I couldn't remember if the number was before or after. 8817 Just Colleen, the year that I was born, the year that my daughter was born. And I just put some stuff out on Facebook, and people started kind of really liking it and purchasing a ton of things from me, like tons and tons of spreadsheets and dashboards. And I would create all of these crazy systems. I did a lot of like app script and stuff in the background and everything. And then a few months later, or maybe even a year later, I'd be like, hey, how's it going? How, like, are people using it? And it was crickets. Nothing was coming back. And I was like, okay, you just paid me a lot of money to make this and nobody's using it. So there's something wrong here. And I feel like I'm just wasting my time. I mean, yeah, I was getting paid for it, but at the end of the day, like that's not my goal is impact. And so I did some deep reflecting on the work that I had done, and really decided that it wasn't just the data that we needed more of, or it wasn't just the data visualizations that we needed more of. It was really the fact that we were lacking in data literacy and data culture. And in order to build those two up, you have to be intentional about how you use data in schools. So once I kind of came to that aha, I started consulting with schools all over on not just data visualization, but also data culture and data literacy. And that's when I started writing this book back. I think it's been like a year and a half. I did it very slowly. It was like something I was just doing on the side, I didn't want to rush it. And in the midst of kind of realizing that we had a data culture problem last summer, my co-founder Janelle had come to me and she was like, "Hey, do you want to help me build Simplified?" And I was like, "Yes, of course. This is along the lines of exactly what I talk about." And we'll get into, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about my whole spiel on tiny data, but that's kind of what led me to this aha of like, it's data culture. We don't need more data. We don't need more dashboards. We need to really build up our teachers.
I like that. So it's about building the teachers. It's about really making an impact in their life, not just focusing on numbers. And I feel this is very important because um, teachers need that kind of space where sometimes we don't understand. They don't understand because I'm an educator as well, and we don't understand all of these spreadsheets and stuff. But I feel it helps with, as you said, connection and trust, so we can actually link both together and really start creating something that the data gives us, so we can empower our school community better. So you often say that teachers don't need more data; they need clarity, they need confidence, and they need support. So really, what's the difference on how can school leaders create a culture where data empowers rather than overwhelms educators?
Yeah, so I said I would get to the tiny data, and I think this is where it fits in.
After I
So
will ask you this question. I will ask you this question.
you asked me
So
about the tiny data.
yes.
So I think okay, so I'll talk a little bit more about the cycles and then we'll talk about the tiny data. But essentially what happens when I'm consulting with schools is the leader will come to me and they'll say, I have a data problem. We're trying to be data driven and I had this data meeting and I brought this data to them and like then the meeting was over and nobody's doing anything. I'm like, okay, what's next? Like, what's next in the plan? And they're like, I don't know, another data meeting next year and cross our fingers and hope that it changes. I'm like, no, no, no. In order for us to be able to really get that shared ownership of data, we have to be able to see a cycle all the way through. So it's not just about collecting the data and putting the data in front of the teachers. It's about coming up with a plan, which is often part of the data meeting. A lot of times that happens. But then also setting a date where it's like, okay, we will come back to this in a month or in 2 months or during our next diagnostic or whenever it might be to see whether or not it had an impact. The whole goal is to make sure that what the teachers are doing connects to the impact that they have. So if you can connect those two, that's when it starts to catch on. That's when those teachers start building that momentum. That's when they start getting that efficacy. It kind of like explodes. And I've seen it explode like that in lots of different schools. My biggest example and the example I walk through in my book is the district where I was full-time data coach and then district data coordinator and we did it very slowly. It was a very slow rollout in that elementary school. We ended up bringing them out of improvement status because of it, but it was very much so like, what can we do to help them get the momentum going from connecting what they're doing in the classroom to the impact that it has on the students.
I like that. I like that. And I feel that this is where, sometimes teachers, they feel they associate data with accountability rather than growth. They all will
Mhm.
feel that, the data is really not allowing them to rebuild trust, but really it becomes like a tool of surveillance, not really a tool to really learn, from what they are actually doing in class. So your work, this is the part that you love because we're going to talk about that. So
Yeah.
your work introduces the concept of tiny data. So what does tiny data look like in a real classroom? And why can these small, meaningful steps, observations, can do to have a greater impact than really large dashboards or endless reports?
Yeah. So I talked about, when leaders come to me and they say we had this data meeting, and one of the biggest issues was that they're not completing the cycle. I would say another really big issue is that they're putting data in front of these teachers that the teachers are struggling to connect that data to the impact that it has on, or connect that data, sorry, that's the impact, to the actions that they have in the classroom.
Mm,
And so what we want to do is go as tiny as possible with that data in order to help teachers feel like they have control and ownership of the students' learning. Um, so I like to picture like two triangles, and it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to explain, but one is upside down with the big data at the top. So big data, by big data, I mean like state assessments, and then you go a little bit lower to like diagnostics and benchmarks, a little bit lower to maybe like summative classroom assessments. And then you get all the way down to that super formative tiny data in the classroom. So that's your exit tickets, your observations of students, anything that's happening in the classroom in a moment's notice, right? Not the kind of stuff that we actually like lay down a formal test for, but on the other side, so I have the upside down triangle. On the other side is the right side up triangle. And that's a triangle that shows the amount of impact that it has on student learning and teacher support. So if you're looking at those that big data, that state assessment data, that has very little impact for a couple different reasons. One, it's usually too late, right? It's about last year. And two, it's such a big, dense amount of data that it's really difficult to narrow it down to like, I did this and this is what happened on that state assessment. And so it becomes a challenge to connect that action to impact, and therefore you can't get that momentum going. And then you go all the way down to the bottom with that tiny data. When you're looking at tiny data, you can say, I did this in the classroom. I did it consistently for 3 days, and it had this impact on the formative assessment. Very fast, very easy to see the connection. And again, once you start getting that connection, that's when you start building that self efficacy. And then you can do it in groups to build that collective teacher efficacy, which we know is super strong. And it's all about making those connections. Once you start making those connections, then you can start to build on that tiny data. And eventually you start to see the patterns in the bigger data. But I always tell leaders, go to that classroom data. If you're trying to build up your data culture, do not start with state assessments. They are scary. They tell us nothing. Do not
mm.
start with diagnostics. They tell us a little bit, but it's still hard to kind of make those connections. Go all the way down to the bottom to that super tiny data, which is what we talk about on Simplified. We drill everything down to micro skills and measure micro skills alongside the supports that we're giving students. So it's kind of like we collect data and kind of like as a teacher and student team, which is really neat because then you can definitely see like I did this and it had an impact on the student's behavior, the student's learning. So that's what I mean by tiny data.
I love it. I love it. And yes, talk about your podcast. You have a podcast called Simplified, is it? Or Tiny Data? Can you just remind me your podcast? I know I was
Correct.
part of it last time, but
Yeah.
remind me what it is and why you
So
actually
there's
created the podcast.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different names flying around. So just to help simplify this, which is funny because the name of our platform and data cycle coaching is Simplified, spelled with two Y's. So don't type simplified in, normally it won't come up. We spell simplified in the least simple way possible. That's what we like to say. So Simplified is it's we do platform alongside our data cycle coaching. And then my business from that I started with consulting is data informed impact. And that's when I really started working with data culture, data literacy, and data visualization. And then I wrote the book, Data Informed, People Driven. And the name of the podcast is just Data and Education. So
I like
lots of
that.
names in there, but Data and Education is a podcast. We're actually on the third season. I started that by myself a couple years ago, and I would just do one-on-one interviews similar to what we're doing right now. And then our second season, we had hour-long live panels. So it
Mm,
was myself and I had Janelle, my co-founder. from Symplifyed join me, and then we had usually two or three other educational experts or boots on the ground, and we would talk about certain topics and go through questions. That was really fun, but it was also really exhausting.
Yes,
um,
it is.
so we're like, okay, what can we do for season three that is not as exhausting? And so we went the complete opposite of that. And now we do our Learn in 10. So season three is
Agree.
Learn in 10. That's where we introduce someone who has some kind of thing to teach us. They introduce a concept in 10 minutes, give us some kind of framework, which is what you did. You did the WISE framework. It was awesome. And then we kind of related to what we do at Simplified with the micro skills and looking at support and outcome together. Um, so yeah, that will be out probably by the time this airs. We will have a couple episodes out. So yes.
Excellent, excellent. I love that. It's so hard as well, but I feel like you're doing your best. And I know that, when you create a business as well and you are an expert in something, you will need to have that word that stick to you and your branding, and your word is data. Obviously, this is it. Period. Data simplified.
Obsession.
That's it. And my word is wise, wisdom,
Yep.
So I feel like it's so important because we know who to get to for different, I would say, different word, different branding for what we offer. So last question, okay? So for school leaders listening to us right now, okay, who want to move from using data as judgment, okay, to using data as support. So what are three practical actions that they can take, starting for example from Monday, okay, from Monday morning, to build trust, strengthen collaboration, and improve student success? So share three practical actions.
Sure. So this actually goes along with my tiny data project, another name that I'm throwing out there, which is kind of like this pledge that I'm having educators take that is centered around the book Data Informed People Driven. And it's six different pledges, and it really goes over, what can we do now to help build that data culture and get our teachers to use data in a way that feels productive and also, appreciates them as educators. And so, one big thing that I always say is make sure that you are not ignoring the context. It is so important that you allow there to be context to the data. Some leaders will come in and say, I have this data doesn't lie, this data tells all. What are we going to do? And, every teacher in that room is thinking, oh my goodness, I had a really rough class last year. I had three students who were suspended. I had one student who was absent all year. Like they're just going through all of the stories, right? That are behind that data. And if we're ignoring those stories, it makes teachers feel as though we don't trust their opinion, their intuition as professionals. And so one thing that I love to tell administrators is, and I figured this out by doing this. I had a trust problem with a report that I was sending out as a new data coach. All these lessons I've learned on my own, believe me. So
That's, yeah.
I went into the meeting and I said, okay, here's the report. We see this report once a week. Um, it has this data on it. And it was like iReady, weekly iReady data. And I was like, what does this data not show? What do we not see in this data? And I went over to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and I said, tell me. And someone raised their hand. They said, my class is an enrichment class, so we don't spend a lot of time on iReady because we're working on projects. Wrote it up. Someone else said, I have three students out right now, so my averages are really off right now. Wrote it up. Another person said, I'm really struggling with behavior management in my class, and I don't know how to incorporate the use of iReady while working on resets with my classroom. Wrote it up there. And I just sat there and wrote everything up. And I said, this is all incredibly important information. We need to understand that this is what's behind this data. But we also have this data. So what can we do to make all of this valuable to us? What can we learn from looking at this data with the context right next to it? And what that did was It gave the teachers kind of like this permission to exhale, right? They're like, oh, we can talk about those things instead of letting it fester while they're sitting there working through their whatever data driven practice that they have for that data meeting.
Mm,
They're able to get all of that out of their system and then say, okay, now we know everything. Now what can we do? So definitely ask that question. Another thing is to remove or replace as much as you can. If you are asking your teacher to do something new, and that's not just strictly data informed practices, but if you're asking teachers to do something new, you should also be making it clear to them this is what this is going to replace, or this is what I'm going to take off your plate instead. We cannot keep adding to teachers' plates. It's impossible. Like it just
mm,
is not going to work. So that's another thing. And then I would say drill down your focus. Really, really focus in on exactly what you want to work on in that moment of time. And maybe that's a group decision, maybe that's something that already made itself apparent through some other data. But again, we're not giving teachers a whole spread and saying, figure this out, do something.
mm.
We're drilling down to one tiny little thing that we want to work on so that we can then start having that impact.
I like that. So let's simplify it. Three things straight away. Take action. This. Repeat for the audience because I feel they're gonna be like, okay, I understand that, but can you just repeat again for us?
You're testing my memory. Okay, so focus and we'll go backwards. Focus in on one tiny thing.
That's it.
Remove and replace as much as possible. And
Awesome.
then don't ignore the context.
Excellent. I like that. It was simplified, it was straightforward. So if you need a data-driven expert that can help you to really help your team to go from data to trust, I would encourage you to join to connect with Jessica Lane. I will put her details of socials in the description section. And thank you so much, Jessica, for being with us today and sharing your expertise. And yes, don't forget, guys, to comment, like, and share, and to join my community so I can help you as well to grow from educator to expert. See you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Jessica.
you.